Today we are going to talk about restoring hope during hard times. So if you are going through anything hard right now, this video is for you. We tackle these relevant topics every week, so please take a quick moment to support our efforts by subscribing to our channel and hitting the bell for notifications. Thank you so much for tuning in to LilyTube.
Why do we have hard times? Why do bad things happen to good people? President Spencer W. Kimball gave a talk called Tragedy or Destiny, where he said, if good things happened to us whenever we were good and bad things happened to us whenever we were bad, we would have no freedom to choose, only satanic controls. Sometimes we have to choose to do the right thing even when there is not a reward that immediately follows.
And even when bad things happen and we're making good choices.
Right. We live in a fallen world. There are thorns, thistles, and noxious weeds that invade our farms and gardens. But we want to promise you that no storm lasts forever.
I think when the real storms of life happen, it feels like they're going to last forever.
Right. Cathy, teens attempt suicide at a higher rate than adults do. Dr. Carl Fleischer says, and this is a quote, teenagers and young adults have the highest rates of suicide compared to other ages. Why? Well, at least one reason that I believe this is true is that we as adults, if we've gotten through a few things in life, if we've had a few painful experiences, we know that ultimately things get better. For younger people, they don't always understand that. It feels like a bad situation, a painful situation, is going to just go on, and there's no hope for it getting any better. So teens choose to end their lives at a higher rate than adults do. But what does that tell us? It tells us that the key is hope. The key is being able to have some sense that things can get better, that if you're in a bad place emotionally, things can improve and will improve.
Yeah, I think it can make all the difference when things are stacked up against you and you might have a whole lot of those risk factors. If you have hope, if you believe things will get better, and you really know they will, or even maybe you just trust other people who say they will, there's a lot better chance that not only will you get through it, but you'll get beyond it to a life that's worth living for. There's these thoughts like, I didn't get married to get divorced. And what goes along with that is this sense of, it wasn't supposed to be this way. And we've noticed in our coaching practice that it wasn't supposed to be this way, whether it's the loss of a marriage, the loss of a job, the loss of a family member, all of the things that can be really hard to get through, that can cause very dark times for us. If the statement, it's not supposed to be this way, is attached to all of what's happening, then we have a tendency to fight against reality and want it to be different. And that wanting it to be different can keep us in despair for a lot longer. It has been brought to our attention recently, though, with our own big unexpected loss. Sometimes for a period of time. It's not supposed to be this way as part of grieving. It is part of the process of going through and figuring out, okay, what now and why? And all the things that aren't necessarily helpful in the long run, but you have to feel the feelings that go with them.
To be more clear about what Cathy just alluded to, I had a very difficult experience just a few days before we recorded this, and even after we outlined this program. The police came to our door and told me that my sweet 24-year-old son, Henry, had been killed in a mountain climbing accident. Of course, that is every parent's worst nightmare, and it actually came to visit me. Well, there's something I want to tell you about that. A couple of things. Number one, I know I'll never get over it. Now, I will, in time, learn to move on from it, be able to be happy again, and be able to think of Henry without pain. But that's a very difficult thing to do in this kind of situation. It takes a little bit of time to get to that place.
And it definitely takes intentional efforts.
Yeah, my grandmother was in her mid-80s when she was visiting my parents at their house, and I was there, and I asked her about the day her mother died. She said, "Oh, I remember it. It was the worst day of my life." And she started taking me through in detail all of the things that happened. And you know what? She began to cry as she talked about this, about an event that occurred 70 years earlier. It's incredible. So those hurts that we experience, the really big ones like that, like a little girl losing her mother, we don't get over it. We get used to it. We learn to move on and have a happy life. But it's not a matter of, someday I'm not going to care anymore that this person's gone. That just doesn't happen. With my son Henry, I know I'll always care. I know I will always look back with a certain amount of gratitude for the time we had together and the experiences. Doesn't mean it won't still hurt sometimes, even 20, 30, 60 years after the fact.
Jeff, when you talk about not ever getting over something but getting used to it, it's not because we're victims of these circumstances, but because we choose love.
Right.
When we are sorrowing over the loss of a marriage or a loved one who's died, we're choosing love. Sorrow and grief is the tax on love.
Right. And we know that in this life, all love ends in pain one way or another. And that's a hard truth. But it's also one that if we can relax into it, if we can lean into it, we realize that the pain we feel at a loss is there because we loved so intensely. And, I'm grateful that I have the perspective now that I'm a positive person. My son could see it, and he said, "Dad, you can't give up." And I want to tell you, you have the choice to become the most positive person that you know and to tell yourself, "I can't give up." Martin Seligman wrote a great book called Learned Optimism, where he talked about how outcomes are better for people who are optimistic than those who are pessimistic. I'll give you a quick example. Let's suppose that I start a business and then within a few months market conditions turn sour for some economic reason beyond me. If I say to myself, "This is just the kind of thing that always happens to me. This is just my luck," how likely am I to keep trying or to try again? Not that likely, right? But if I think, "Oh, this was a crazy aberration. This isn't what happens to me, but this is what happened now, and that's the exception to things normally do work out for me."
I love that thought. That thought feels so much lighter, so much better, and so much more hopeful.
Right.
I actually have this big pet peeve about Murphy's Law, because whenever we refer to Murphy's Law as if it's a part of us, a part of our lives, we're inviting more of that in. And I've tried to throw out Murphy's Law from my vocabulary because I don't want it to be, it's not something I'm afraid to say. I just don't want it to be something I attach to.
And so that's an important idea. I would recommend to you finding our podcast Our podcast is called Lily Pod, and look for an earlier episode of that called The Truth About Positive People. We talk a lot about positive people in that episode.
And the traits of those positive people.
Right, and one of those traits is resilience, and resilience comes from optimism and hope. And that begins in our thoughts. Now, Cathy could tell you that in certain moments, when I'm dealing with technology problems, for example, I think that technology is out to get me, that my computer is out to get me, and, all that does, of course, is multiplies my frustration when I'm in customer service hell all afternoon.
And even calling it that isn't necessarily going to help you get through it faster.
Right. I want to suggest also that in the scriptures, there are examples of many positive people facing adversity. Whether you look at Job, the classic example, or you look at Joseph being sold as a slave into Egypt by his own brothers and eventually going to prison there. I mean, imagine that. You look at Jonah and he's in the belly of a whale for 3 days. I mean, you go through the Old Testament and there are a myriad of examples of people that are in these impossible situations that they don't want to be in. And they say, God, use me how you want. I'm in a place I don't want to be. Show me how to make the best of this and the most of this. And then they do, and miraculous things happen. So we want to say things really do get better if you're intentional.
Things not only get better, but we have this philosophy, this belief that there are great blessings in store when we get through the hard stuff. I really believe it. I mean, I've seen it time and time again in history, in our own lives, in our clients' lives. There are these wonderful, amazing blessings in store when we choose intentionally and patiently to get through the dark times.
Cathy, we've talked a lot in the last few days, and I know for this loss of my sweet, beloved son is going to hurt for a long time. But I know something else because I went through this when I lost my little brother. He was 9 years younger than me. That ultimately you do move on. You do feel better. It doesn't mean you stop hurting over it. Once in a while, that pain is still going to come up. But I know what to expect this time. And I know that ultimately I will be able to think about Henry without pain. And knowing that gives me hope that no storm lasts forever, that I'm not going to feel like I've been kicked in the chest for the rest of my life until I see him again. And you know what? Based on what I said earlier, I know he wants me to be happy. I know he wants me to be the positive person that he looked up to and as the most positive person he knew. I know that that's who he wants me to be. He doesn't want me to wallow forever in grief over his loss. I think he would say to me, Dad, I lived my life the best I could, for better or for worse. Now go live yours. And so in time, I'll be able to do that. And I hope all the rest of you can too. Whatever you've gone through, whatever you're going through, believe that God has a plan for you and that the pain will subside and you will feel better in time.
Because we're talking about restoring hope during hard times, it will require some faith to believe in things that don't exist yet, to believe that there are blessings after the storms.
In Romans 8, verse 28, Paul said, all things work together for good to them that love God and to them that are called according to his purpose. You are called according to his purpose. I hope you love him. Now, I look at what I've gone through lately, and boy, it's hard to see how that's working together for my good because it caused so much pain. But I do believe it. I do believe what Paul said, that we can be happy in any adversity, knowing that everything ultimately is working together for our good.
What is your personal moment in Gethsemane? What dark times have come upon you? What loss have you been given the challenge of recovering from? We realize that these dark moments can be really personal, but we would absolutely love to hear the challenges you are overcoming or that you have overcome in your life, because we all have them, and when we can share them, the world's just a little bit less dark and we feel a little bit less alone. Having said that, just remember that any time is a great time for more love in your life. Thank you for watching.